is so wonderful to see young women here. All of you are, well, of course, to me, you're all young. But I love the fact that the speaker you just had is a young lady who just stepped out of her box to do what she's doing. And she uses her voice to do this. I was thinking that it was in 1959, 100 years ago, that I discovered for the first time segregation, bigotry, social injustice, and I didn't understand it. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I never saw any of it. It never touched me. I went to schools with white kids, lived in the neighborhood with white people because it was a natural thing to do. Nobody in my family talked about it. Nobody in my world talked about it other than on the news, the buses and whatever in Little Rock, the kids in Little Rock. I couldn't understand it, but I knew that I had to somehow find out. I was not going to ever just sit back like a monkey and just say, yes, okay, when it wasn't okay. So I found these groups that I joined, like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Speak for that was because Stokely Carmichael was the leader, and he was so sexy. And we went on many, many marches together. And as a result of that, I learned more and more about what this was all about and how it was hurting us as a people, as a country, as humans. And I have to admit that I was arrested on my very first demonstration and arrested for the third and fourth and many other times after that. My mother never knew, ever. Many times when we were arrested, we were not charged. We were just taken to a room and locked in a room, scared to death, verbally abused, and thinking that, this was what life was going to be like. We were just going to get beaten up and called names because we didn't like what was happening. So after several years of that, they started talking about this March on Washington. And by this time, it was 1963. And I was determined to go to this march. And one of the problems was I had no money. I had no job. I had no money at all. When sometimes you'll say, you have no money, but you've got $10 in your pocket. I had no money. So my friends had a party to raise the money for my train ticket. And the train ticket cost $12, which was a lot of money. Well, you don't have any money. So I was going to Washington. However, I talked to my mother about it. I didn't tell her I was thinking about going. I didn't ask her, could I go? But we were talking about it, and she said, ladies wouldn't do things like that. And my mother had a way of saying things like that, like it was going to be my ticket to a one-way trip to the fires of hell. Or I would have to give up my membership card to civilized America. So I didn't tell her that I was going, but I was determined I was going to go. And we got there to the train station in Pittsburgh, and there were about 15 in my group. And we were all black kids around my age. It was the day after my 20th birthday. So you could tell how old I am. And there was another group going with us who was a much larger group, and they were all white people. They were all middle-aged or older, and I couldn't figure out, well, what are they doing here? And they had signs, free black people and jobs. I said, what? And they were going with us. So I think my whole group thought this was going to be a march with black kids like me, maybe about 1,000 of them. Well, as it turns out, 250,000 people showed up of every age and every color. That was amazing. It was also amazing they had porta potties, and I don't use those, so I didn't go to the bathroom until I left DC. I just couldn't do it. So my mother never knew, ever. And because all I kept thinking about was, we do not have a voice as women, as females. We have a voice, but we were not allowed to use our voice. We were not allowed to do anything but what we thought we were supposed to do: maintain families, have families, become teachers and social workers and nurses. It's still strange to see a male nurse, because in my generation, that just didn't happen. We didn't use our voices. The most powerful voice in America, in my opinion, is the voice of a woman. Recently, I heard the words on television, "Don't mess with me." The most powerful woman in America said those words. She used her voice to make the changes and to continue to make the changes that we want to see. We all have that power. You have that power to teach that to your children, your daughters especially, that you have to speak up when something is wrong in your mind. And there are things that are wrong. We cannot cage our children. We cannot turn people away because of who they look like and who they love. We can't do that. We can't complain about climate change without doing something about it. One of the things that really upsets me more is, or most, is when you're sitting around talking to people and they're complaining about what's happening on CNN, and they're complaining about, but they don't do anything about it. They don't pick up a phone and call their representatives. They don't pick up a phone and text the representatives, which you can do now. They just complain about it. It's not going to work. You have to do something. The only time anything significant ever happened in my lifetime in this country is through physical demonstration. And people say, "No, but that's so old-fashioned." Oh, well, it is. But that's what has to be done. I was thinking the other day about, well, I'll be honest, I was watching for the 10th time the movie Hidden Figures. Every time I watch it, I get angry. I get furious. Because this happened in the 60s. I was an adult, and I had no idea. None whatsoever. I don't think anybody knew. We all knew who John Glenn was. We all knew who Ellen Shepard was. We all did. We didn't know that a black woman put him up there and got him home safely. We didn't know. And nobody told us for 50 years. That's horrible. That's diabolical to me. Or when you think about Henrietta Lacks, if you don't know who she was a black woman who had breast cancer in the 50s. And at Johns Hopkins Hospital, they took her cells, discovered they didn't die, and used them for cancer research, intravenous births, polio vaccine. To this day, they're still using what they call the HeLa cells. It's generated billions of dollars, billions. Her family lived in poverty. They didn't know. Nobody told them. Not only did they keep it a secret, they changed the name. They didn't give the right name of Henrietta Lacks. They gave like Helen Lane. Don't let that happen. I am probably not going to be here to see my granddaughter graduate from Harvard as a physician, which she will be. But I do feel that it's important that you start moving on from this day. using your voice, doing what has to be done. It doesn't matter where. It could be in your children's schools. You don't like what they're teaching. You don't like how they're teaching. You should control those schools. You're paying for them. You should control what goes on in those schools. Don't let anybody else do that. Don't let the state take over your school. You take over your school. How many of you have ever been to Austin? Not ever. Not about that. But I was surprised going back to 56 years ago, to the march, and I was surprised that people were surprised that I went, or people were just overwhelmed that I went, because I didn't think it was a big deal. I did it because it was the thing to do. And I would do it again and still not think it's a big deal. Well, my mother died and never knew. Nobody ever really knew. Until one day, I was going home, this is about 2 years ago, I was going home and I was listening to NPR, and they had a man talking about, he had produced the movie The Lovings, or the movie about this interracial couple. I didn't know who they were. And so I thought, I'm gonna watch the documentary that was gonna be on that night. So I watched it, and they asked the wife, had she ever been involved with civil rights since it was in the 60s? And she said no, but she was too busy with her case. As they did that, this came on my TV. That was me. That was me. And it was, here I am on television the whole time, had no idea that there was any film of me, ever. That anybody knew that I was there. That I guess I wonder if my mother ever knew I was there. I don't know. I have no idea. But I was in that group. Look at the men all dressed with ties and coats. Can you imagine a march like that today? What they'd be wearing? You know, we didn't wear jeans or slacks or anything like that. Everybody was all dressed up, marching. In the heat, August in DC is hotter than it is here. It's horrible. But I want to close and say to you that I am depending on you. I'm looking at Grace, who is here, and she's young, she's a minority, and she's doing this. That's amazing to me. That is absolutely incredible. You can do it too. Speak up, use your voice. I have a 2.5-year-old granddaughter who calls me Gigi, and I want to know when I die that she's gonna say, my Gigi did her thing. My Gigi spoke up. Don't mess with my Gigi. Thank you.